All right, we live. Hello, Hart, and welcome on Gelato. Nice to see you, man.
Hey, man. Thank you. It's great. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's been a while since we talked. I think last time we had some very intense talks was about a bit over a year ago when the RAS, the rollup as a service space, was taking off and everyone and their grandma was deploying NL2. And we were, of course, working with you guys on some of our chains, some of our rollup as a service chains at Gelato, trying to get across online. And I was talking to you about all of the cool stuff that's happening, but also all of the early design flaws in the L2 systems, like the optimistic 7-day delays and this and that were making your life very, very hard. So I'm happy to jump into what Across is today and unpack some of these early successes and challenges and talk about how the space is evolving, what we can expect to happen, how Across will scale. So all of that we will unpack in the episode today. As always on Gelato, it's going to be insanely technical. So the gloves are off, and yeah, but maybe still let's start with giving a very brief sort of, not so brief, I guess, history of what Across is, where you come from, where you are today, and yeah, we take it from there.
Yeah. Okay. We'll try to keep it brief though. So, I mean, it is relevant that I come from a technical background. So I studied computer science, but then I worked in finance as a bond trader for 8 years, started my career, and then I had a fintech business. But the finance part is useful here. We can talk about how this fits in the Across design because there are many elements of financial engineering and sort of financial marketplaces that are involved in how Across works. Okay. And then, starting 2018, I went full-time into crypto. My first project that's still alive is UMA, which is best known as the Oracle for Polymarket. So helping create a decentralized dispute resolution platform, kind of decentralized truth machine. And it's frankly out of UMA that Across was birthed. This was back 3.5 years ago, 3 years ago, when you had optimistic rollups that had this super annoying 7-day withdrawal window. And the very first version of Across, which nobody even realizes now, only went in one direction. It only let you get off these 7-day bridges quickly. It was basically a hackathon, a toy project. And we thought that was kind of cool. And then we expanded it into basically the architecture that Across has today, which is this intent-based bridging architecture. You want me to keep ranting? How you want me to do this?
Definitely.
All right.
Keep going.
All right, Lewis. So the problem here is we want to connect two blockchains. And specifically, I'm going to say that the main thing I want to do is move assets. And we'll talk about how you might want to do more than that. But I want to move assets between chain A and chain B. And you want to do that quickly. And the core problem we have, since we're doing a technical podcast, is these blockchains have long finality times. They don't let you confirm things very quickly. And finality on some of these optimistic rollups is honestly a tricky concept, but you could say it takes as long as 7 days before you have full finality on these chains. And you don't want to wait 7 days to go between blockchains. It just doesn't work. So the idea here with the intent-based bridging is that the user's funds are going to get locked in escrow on an origin chain. And the user is going to broadcast their intent, what they want to do, to a network of third-party actors, solvers. And those third-party actors are then going to compete and fill the user with their own capital on the destination chain. And they can do that really quickly because these third-party solvers can take on finality risk. They can price statistically what the risk is of a reorg, or a risk is that they won't get their money back. And so they can fill users extremely quickly on the destination chain. Users happy, they can get a fill in under 2 seconds most of the time in our system, move on with their day. And then the protocol will then verify that the intent was in fact filled before releasing user funds from escrow back to the solver. So yeah, that's the pitch I've given a bunch of times on explaining intent-based bridging. But really what it's all about is we are selling speed. We are figuring out how to connect these blockchains in faster than finality ways so that users can move assets. And increasingly, we can talk about a lot more than assets, but they can move assets between blockchains really quickly, and make it feel like one unified network with like sub 2-second kind of bridging speeds.
Yes, and I think Across really sort of pioneered, but definitely also was probably the biggest intent-based application. And of course, intents has been, at some point, it has been like a bit of a hype buzzword. Like I remember seeing a bunch of decks being sent to me for all sorts of projects that were like raising funds for this next intent thing, right? Like that was probably like a year ago or so, or 2 years ago. So to quickly unpack that architecture of what Across is, again, listeners, we have produced a bunch of blog content on the gelato.network/blog. I think we are changing the domain soon, so that's coming. Gelato Cloud is coming, so be on the watch for that. But anyways, you can dive in there. Again, we have a whole series, not just on Across, also on LayerZero, Hyperlane, Stargate, all of these great projects that are working in the bridging and interop space. And yeah, let's stick to this application specific use case to bridging, right? Because I mean, I think that just sort of is the most interesting use case and what all of these protocols are used for. And Across is quite unique in that it has sort of pioneered this optimistic design where essentially Across, and it is a marketplace of solvers and fillers, right? Like, so Across is this sort of coordination protocol where everyone in the world who has some capital and risk management can come and they can say, okay, a user wants to give me tokens on Arbitrum, ETH, let's say on Arbitrum, and the user wants to have an equal amount of ETH on Base. That's a cross-chain transfer. Like as a concept, first mental unlock here is no funds are actually, being transferred between the blockchains. The blockchains can't do that. Rollups can't do that. That is an abstraction. What really happens is there's like a bit of a swap where Across sort of facilitates a swap on Arbitrum. In Across solver, filler, relay, or whatever you want to call it, is saying, okay, I'm going to take the user's funds on Arbitrum and put them into escrow. This is what Across does, and I'm going to immediately fill the user on Base where they want to go, right? So I'm going to give the user my ETH on Base immediately, instantly. That's the speed. That's crazy. Wow, cool, right? Like this is liquidity management. Which, by the way, I mean, you mentioned you were in fintech. Most of you guys, if you're using Revolut or something, I've heard that fintechs basically do the same. Like if they have like fast bank transfers or something, all they do is pool liquidity on different banks and they just give you access to that liquidity, right?
Yep.
So I guess like this already existed before blockchains in a way. But yeah, so this is like Across is essentially this capital credit marketplace, and the risk that is being like, so what do we want is speed, right? And this speed comes with a certain risk, reorg risk, finality risk, and all of this risk is absorbed pretty much, I mean, not all, but the majority of the risk is absorbed by the sophisticated entity, the market maker, because they are parting with their funds. They're sending it directly to the user, right? So if let's say the user put the money into escrow on Arbitrum, right? They didn't give that directly to the filler. It's an escrow, right? And now the user has the money from the filler on Base. The user can go away. But if Arbitrum has a reorg and that escrow ends up being reorged out, now suddenly you lost, like the filler, the solver, the entity here lost some money. And so that's the risk that they manage. Technically, it also goes the other way around, I always say, right? Like you could have a user saying, hey, the money is in escrow here, I want it back. I never got that money on Base, I suppose. And then you need this sort of cross-chain dispute settlement, I suppose, where you use UMA oracles underneath. So there's some risk for the user as well. They are relying on the UMA oracle functioning properly. But yeah, first of all, is that like, so I guess the key takeaway here is Across is a very financial application. There's capital management, there's risk management, and fee settings and so on. And Across is really like a more like a marketplace, like almost like I guess like an eBay or Craigslist or whatever the analogy is. It is very important. It is not a pooled model, which you had commonly before you invented this intent-based thing, like the old bridges, like multi-chain, if you guys remember, like there were all of these stable whatever AMMs with a pooled model, and even Stargate to this day is having more of a pooled model. So Across is very different from that. So yeah, would that be a good summary of the components, roughly speaking?
Yeah, I think that is. And I think this is a different way of thinking about it, but maybe for like, you know, the pretty nerdy audience we have, maybe interesting. One way to think about, like, people talk about trying to make all these blockchains synchronous, trying to make it feel like you could do atomic things between blockchains, between these different chains. And like, you can't, because they have different finality guarantees, and we'll need like single slot finality and a bunch of other stuff to make it truly synchronous, or do some fancy, you know, it's very hard technical problem to try to make these things be like atomic. But you can kind of imagine that if you have a sophisticated third party, a solver that is willing to front money, you can actually almost emulate an atomic experience by having this third party kind of like use their own capital to plug the gaps between blockchains. So I'm not sure that this will totally land with everybody, but it's kind of a very financy way to think about it, where I'm using this network of third-party actors to basically give me the money on chain B almost instantly, to make it feel like it's one atomic-like transaction. But they're taking on all the back-end risk of kind of getting their money back, getting repaid. And yeah, so it is very much a coordination protocol. You said that earlier, and I like that. It's very much a coordination protocol for these third-party actors to unify these blockchains and make them feel like one experience.
Yes, and I think what Across, I mean, where it really provides the value is very simply put in, like, first of all, having built the smart contract protocol that now has some network effects, right? A lot of capital around the world, solvers all around the world are integrating with that protocol and trusting it with their capital, right? Like that's a good mode already. And then you essentially have, of course, the SDKs for cross-chain transfers, the backend APIs, and then, of course, the most important thing that we haven't addressed yet is, what about the actual, inventory management, and what about capital efficiency? And this is, I think, the hardest nut to crack. And Across has a very pure approach. We can dive into that later, but Across is only working, at least that used to be, maybe it's not the case anymore, but it's only working with canonical or /native tokens. That means on L2s, it is working with the ETH and tokens that come from the L2 bridge. By the way, in general, Across, as I remember, is also a very much focused on just Ethereum L2s. We can also unpack that later on, like why that focus and so on, is that still relevant today? And but yeah, essentially Across is not working with mint and burn assets. So Across does not have a mint and burn button like other bridges do, like LayerZero of T's famously, right? Like Hyperlane has their own thing as well. They can sort of create. They can create tokens out of thin air on chains based on essentially integrating with their interop messaging protocols. And Across is not doing any of that. We can unpack like the reason, like security concerns, decentralization concerns, whatnot. So Across is taking assets as they are and making markets within these limitations across chains. Across is not an asset issuer itself because it doesn't have like a sort of asset issuance attestation protocol like a Circle CCP or a LayerZero or a Hyperlane. And so this is very important to know. And within these constraints, so Across needs to move needs to essentially what we're optimizing for is making sure that the inventory is always where the most fills are needed, right? And the problem is, if you have inventory on Arbitrum as a solver and inventory on Base, and on this particular day, Base had some farming or something, and you filled everything on Base, so now on Base you're dry, you don't have much capital. Ideally, you would want to move that capital from Arbitrum to Base where more activity is, but you can't work against the limitations of blockchains. So like now you as the solver in the system, you actually have to deal with the reality of the 7-day withdrawal on Arbitrum and so on. You cannot abstract that away for you. You're abstracting that away for other people. You can't do the same trick for you, right? Like you're now beholden to these rules. So how do you deal with this? There's cool projects out there like that I talked to in the past. I had them on the show, Arjun from Everclear, that are trying to help projects like you with like netting out clearing houses and so on. But yeah, that seems to be a very important part of the operation: capital efficiency, rebalancing, making sure capital is there injected, but at the same time trying to not have a bunch of stale capital sitting around that isn't filling anything, right? So yeah, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So okay, there's a bunch in there to unpack. And first of all, there's also like, I think you're publishing this pretty soon, so there's some stuff I can't say, but there's a bunch of really cool announcements coming out in the coming weeks that hopefully we'll have to come back and talk about them too. Anyways, Lewis, going
let
back
me
to
say, we now have May 21st, 2025. We could publish this end of next week. I'm not sure, like, you don't have to do the mental gymnastics of figuring out if you,
yeah.
but yeah.
Well, we like what I'll say, and Across has been EVM focused, but there's many. We don't want to be EVM focused forever, right? Like we obviously need to be on Solana at some point, and there's many other things that we need to grow and expand to. And I also want to talk about like mint and burn assets and all that too. But to go back, because you asked a bunch of questions and it's useful. They're really good, and I want to kind of structure them. So Across is not an asset issuer, like you said. We are not like LayerZero or Wormhole or Hyperlane, in that we don't have a format for mint and burn assets. That's not something what we do. If you distill Across into its purest form, we are this coordination protocol for solvers that basically lets them, like what we talked about, do this fast fill on the destination chain. And so you're quite right in that we need solvers to have inventory on the destination chain to be able to fill the user. If they don't have inventory on the destination chain, we can't fill the user, and the whole thing kind of like grinds to a halt. So this is kind of like the biggest constraint in like our scalability over time. And we've done lots and lots of things over the years, or over the last few years, to mitigate this. But the right model to think about is, okay, what does the landscape for moving money between chains natively look like going forward? First of all, you've got a lot more options that keep showing up. And so the more ways there are to actually have solvers rebalance their inventory, the better it is for Across. If somebody invents a new way to rebalance between, like your example of Arbitrum and base is really good, and A to B, right? So users are trying to move money between Arbitrum to base, and eventually solvers need to go the other way. Well, okay, if a solver does have to wait 7 days to get their money off of base, that's hugely expensive for them. And they're only going to be able to do a limited amount of liquidity if the flow is really one way. But if if the 7-day bridge becomes a 1-hour bridge, because let's say base upgrades to a ZK rollup, it becomes like succinct, like OP succinct, or it uses like risk zeros, I think it's called Klua, to upgrade their bridge from 7 days to 1 hour. Well, now it's 168 times faster to move money back in that direction. Or if the asset that we're trying to bridge back is USDC, and Circle has native CCTP on both base and Arbitrum, well, okay, now it takes 12 to 20 minutes to rebalance my assets back. That's way cheaper. Or if Everclear, another protocol, aggregates other types of rebalancing flows, and I can move money in an hour and a half, that seems great. Or if a centralized exchange lets me rebalance through centralized exchange rails as a solver, I can now rebalance much cheaper. And or if the Superchain comes online, and Superchain has another way of me being able to rebalance, quickly between these two chains, my rebalancing costs keep going down. So the mental model here, and I keep saying all these examples, there's more and more technologies that are coming online that allow the solvers to rebalance, that make intents cheaper and easier for solvers to deliver across more and more chains. So this is the part that I get really bullish about, there's all this stuff that's happening that like just makes it cross better. It just makes it kind of like cheaper because rebalancing costs are going to be so much cheaper and easier for our solver network. Does that make sense? Like, do you buy that?
Yes, 100%. So I guess one way of putting it is you guys were super early with your thing, and you are like have been chewing glass because you had to deal with these like horrible 7-day technology that, you know, like it was never meant to stay. If you ask me, like we will be looking back at some point, we were like, wait a second, it took 7 days for fraud proofs to clear. What the hell, right? Like, of course, this isn't the end state. Like, this must change, right? So yeah, and like I said, there's a bunch of technology coming to market. I always say this. I think we like bridging itself is such a confusing word. If you actually want to describe what's happening under the hood, it is so misleading. So I also noticed another thing. A lot of a lot of customers of Gelato and so on, they usually ask, what networks can I connect to with my rollup? Like, what do you support? And really, the right way to ask really the right way to start this question is always start with the asset. Always start with the token and work from there. So the question is, what token do you want on your chain? That's the first question. ETH, USDC. And then the question is, where do you want it to come from? Do you want it to come from Base? Do you want it to come from somewhere else, right? And this is a good way to start, like sort of be a bit more like asset focused, because like you said, an asset like USDC, for example, has a very bespoke rebalancing system from Circle if they are on a chain that you are on as well. And so all of these technologies, like first of all, general technologies like ZK, right? But then also certain asset transfer protocols like Circle, and Superchain bringing on their own sort of Superchain ERC-20 whatever interop protocols with, I think, fast messaging between chains. So how do you expect will this change the nature of what Across is? Like, what are the limiting factors for you today? Of course, rebalancing today is probably costly. It's probably harder, like to fill a lot of trades because of it. Is that like the limiting factor? And what about asset onboarding? I noticed when working with you, of course, in your model, once you have a bit more exotic assets, it's like you guys normally focus on the big cap assets like ETH, stablecoins, and so on. But once you maybe have a gaming token or something, it looks a bit different because there isn't a big market for it, and normally no solver has that in their inventory. So you would have to work with like a loan model. Are you interested in that at all, or is all of that going to change somehow? Yeah, let us know a bit. Yeah. Like, how are these changing tides gonna change how you operate?
All right, so I'll go on one rant and then dial it back here, right? And the rant is basically, okay, Ethereum, when they were trying to scale and came up with this rollup centric roadmap, I think it's like a brilliant, I think it's pretty brilliant technically. Like, I really do think the rollup centric roadmap has worked beautifully in terms of actually adding scale in terms of transactions that you can execute. You need more TPS, just add another rollup. Works great. The 7-day bridge, I really truly think that most everyone in the Ethereum like core development community does not think about the cost that 7-day bridge inserts on these rollups. It's like the capital cost, the financial cost of it taking 7 days to get money off that chain is really, really high. It's like really expensive. And what's actually happened is it's forced many rollups to use mint and burn assets that introduce other security assumptions into their asset issuance, simply because that 7-day bridge is so expensive. And it's sort of this like invisible tax on these rollups, that 7-day bridge, because people don't really think about it, and it only happens when assets are coming off the chain and yada, right? But I look at this and be like, okay, this ability to inserting this roadblock where it takes 7 days to natively rebalance, it makes the rollup centric roadmap unusable for many use cases. Is just my take. And I really think Ethereum has
I
been
love that
slow.
take. I will have something to say about that in a moment, but I'll let you finish.
Well, go. No, go. Tell me your take on this. And then I'll go to like,
Yeah.
again, how I think this is evolving and shifting.
Yeah, so actually I will publish this piece, this thought leadership piece that I've been working on for ages. You might have seen me ranting about sovereign rollups at some point. Of course, we have we built this ABC stack, which is like a purely Celestia sovereign rollup stack, not an Ethereum L2, where I had a lot of mental unlocks about rollups themselves. But recently I thought a lot about, okay, what about Ethereum's rollup-centric roadmap? What about Ethereum L2s? What's their future like? And I just always also keep coming back to this, like, okay, today, like the L2s with the 7-day window, like that's the problem. We need to fix that, right? Like, so simply put, ZK is the absolute solution that we need, and we need it fast. But it's interesting. Like I can also go on a rant here because there's so much LARPing in the L2 space where like most of the L2s are still secured by multi-sigs anyways. So, but like I feel like this fraud-proof thing is a bit of a spicy take I have, but this fraud-proof thing is almost just like marketing. Is like, oh, we sort of are on L2 beat, and we have this thing that we know actually isn't impractical for like very important protocols like Across, but we just put it there so we can sort of be sort of decentralized, like progressively, whatever in name. When in reality, if you already have the multisig today, you might as well say, okay, you know, we don't have the fraud proofs working anyways, right? So we might as well at least, you know, have a 1-day withdrawal or something like that, right? Be a bit more pragmatic and not incentivize everybody bypassing the L2 bridge, which is this article that I'm publishing soon. This motion for the Ethereum settlement score is essentially a motion to L2 beat to go away from this very simplistic green slices and model and actually incorporate more empirical data into the scoring of L2s and more stages even to make the case for what we need at the end here is a sort of real-time sort of settlement on Ethereum, actual assets being in the canonical bridge, and not like nowadays, I think more than 70%. I mean, I can quickly pull something up here that will show, and I know you guys started out with basically saying, look, we are super Ethereum aligned. We only want to work with canonically bridged assets, which like the whole point of L2s is to issue assets on Ethereum, put them in the canonical bridge. That's the whole point, right? And actually, if you look at some data that we have, I will also include in this Ethereum settlement score motion. Here you can see Arbitrum 1. It's Arbitrum 1 and Base, right? Because Arbitrum 1 and Base are the biggest. So Arbitrum 1's canonical assets. So these are the assets that you are in the canonical bridge that you would normally work with in Across. Is like nowadays 30% versus 70% of the assets on Arbitrum are non-canonical, and the non-canonical portion here, as you can see, is made up of L2 native assets. So this is a token that is actually issued on the L2 and not on Ethereum. For example, on Arbitrum, that's the ARB token. And external assets, these are assets that are coming like LayerZero OFTs or Circles, USDC, right? Like that is not in the canonical bridge anymore, but managed by someone like Circle. But like, you also work with USDC, I understand, right? But yeah, so here you see on Arbitrum you have ARB, right? And then the TVS and the canonical bridge, you see ETH and RepBTC a bit, but then I mean, Arbitrum is interesting because of Hyperliquid, but then it gets interesting once you look at the volumes. Like on the volumes, you see most of the volumes are done by external bridges. This includes Circle's CCTP thing, right, which you heavily use, as your solvers use heavily as well to rebalance. But there you see, okay, canonical bridge, like actual canonical bridge usage. I mean, this is like, of course, no one uses the canonical bridge. I guess that's the point of Across as well, right? But then so essentially, I guess it's the asset ratio is interesting, where we see that same on Base. Let's have a quick look on Base.
Yeah.
1 second.
But while you're pulling this up, right? Like, I mean, the point is so obvious to me. It's this 7-day bridge has pushed all these L2s to add in additional security assumptions with like non-canonical assets. Which defy the whole point of having an L2, in my opinion. Like if you want Ethereum security, you've inserted this 7-day bridge, which has meant everybody's got to do things that don't use Ethereum security.
It is very, very, like, it's incentivizing the absolutely wrong behavior, and you can't hate the market for it because, like, it's just the tech is horrible right now. So So it's a similar picture on Base. Most of the assets are not using in the canonical bridge. And actually Base is interesting because you also have a lot of assets that are just minted on the L2, which is also, not aligned with what L2s were meant to be. You have like Arrow, Bread, Kaito, all of these Base native assets that aren't even on Ethereum. And
yeah, that one I'm okay with from a security perspective. That's like, I think that one is okay because those assets are still secured. But I mean, again, assuming once we have like full proofs and all that, those assets are secured by Ethereum security, I think. I don't really mind that. It's the non-canonical assets that have like a third-party bridge where a user can be holding an asset on Base and then it could, in theory, just disappear, or the value of it could disappear because of something that went wrong outside of Ethereum. Like that seems problematic to me.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I should actually dig a bit more into that. But actually, now that I have you here, like for these L2 native assets, they obviously don't really exist on Ethereum today. Are you saying like with ZK rollups at some point and so on, you could, if like sort of create a copy of them on Ethereum and withdraw them? Of course, there wouldn't be any liquidity and so on for them, but at least
okay, there's a whole other thing here too. That's like what is you could kind of classify asset types. Like if you have a protocol that is only on Base and is only ever intended to be on Base, like Aerodrum is kind of an example of this, right? Like Aerodrum feels like it's like we are Base's DEX. Having your token then on Aerodrum is just supposed to be like a fee token related to your DEX. Having your token only exist on Base makes total sense to me. It's like that seems very natural. And so I think there are classes of assets that you like could say should never leave their native chain. Then there are, of course, other assets that are mediums of exchange, which would be like stable coins and like maybe ETH or something like that. And you need to move those around because it's like a medium of exchange they want to put in a bunch of places. And then there are maybe other like sort of financialized assets that you want to have in multiple places because they're also kind of like some collateral you want to use. And like think like real world assets or something like that. Might want a representation of them. But I think that there are very much a class of assets like meme coins. I don't understand why. Frankly, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for a meme coin to exist on more than one chain. It should just be on the chain that it's native to. There's edge cases around that, but for the most part, I think that's totally fine. So if you want to issue a native asset, a native meme coin on an L2, go for it. That to me tracks.
I agree. We all are adults here. Like I don't judge anyways. Like that's not my point. 100%. My point is like an interesting question is what if you have an L2, and I've seen those where all of the assets are L2 native, like right? Like at this point it's a bit like, and then it's a bit weird, I think. Because L2s come with a trustless bridge, and if you don't use it, why have it? But that's more like the sovereign rollup pill. So before we digress in all of these angles, back to Across. But like essentially, you were saying this like the 7-day thing is disincentivizing or incentivizing the wrong behavior of asset issuance on these rollups, and I agree. And I think it like essentially what I'm in my post in my Ethereum motion for the Ethereum settlement score. One of the interesting questions that I think you are also sort of putting out there is, if once we have ZK, like first of all, let's push for that. But once these L2 bridge mechanisms can actually settle within 24 hours or less, like eventually even close to real time, will everything change? Like will in that scenario, will CCDP also like will Circle rather use Ethereum canonical bridging mechanisms again to not have the liability on their own servers? What's your prediction there? How will the space change?
Yeah, I think that to me is pretty obvious. So it's like, there's tweets today too that Succinct, one of the ZK like leading ZK companies, is getting close to real-time proving. They can now prove like 98% of all blocks in less than 12 seconds. And like RiskZero is basically there too. And Justin Drake, I was just reading this today, he wants to have a party on Friday online with like 2 hours of content because he's so damn excited that we're having close to real-time ZK proving. And I look at this and I'm just like, okay, the ZK tech has accelerated way faster than people expected, which is awesome. And it means that once we get rid of all the bugs, which is going to take a while, there's really no reason why we can't ZKify all of these rollups, have incredible throughput on Ethereum, and have withdrawal times that are easily inside an hour, like close to 15-minute type withdrawal times. Once you have that, I don't understand why you would ever want to introduce other security assumptions and run a bunch of servers and have a whole bunch of DevOps and a whole bunch of scary stuff to validate your own bridge or your own asset issuance. You should just use the native like Ethereum and L2 public good. It seems like beautiful. And look, I am kind of talking my own book here a little bit because this is a good future for Across. This is like exactly what I want because we will have these solvers coordinating to do this really fast intent bridging, and then they can rebalance any asset really cheaply in like 15 minutes, and that costs very little. And so you'll be able to have this like very efficient solver network that's able to move their inventory around all over the place. But from like an Ethereum perspective, and just from actually like a Web3 and blockchain native perspective too, it also seems like a really good outcome because you just have like the thing that is securing your transactions is also securing your assets. And that seems like the way it's supposed to be, rather than having additional trust assumptions and all these mint and burn bridges, which, again, we go back through history. The mint and burn bridges are the scariest thing in crypto. Those are the ones that have led to the multi-$100 million hacks because they're just giant honeypots that can delete all your money.
Yes, let's actually unpack quickly what a mint and burn bridge is, and I mean, again, very important to know. Like Across is rejecting that model, at least so far. I think it's one of your philosophies. I'm not sure if at some point you regretted that, because of course the success of LayerZero OFTs and Stargate Hydra things and so on has been immense, right? Like with the Tether deal and so on. It shows up in the volumes, right? Like they're doing insane volumes because I think probably they're moving a bunch of USDT around or whatever it is, and other tokens of OFTs. But of course it is a very different model, and it is taking on a lot of risks and liability because you become an asset issuer of sorts. And it's essentially what a mint and burn model is again, previous episodes, listeners, listen to all the on Gelato episodes, you'll learn a lot, right? So actually, before I go, like very simply put, is like, okay, no one has to rebalance tokens around. There's no cost of rebalancing or anything, because actually your server is connected to the tokens on all the chains, and it's managing the token balances across these chains. Like in the mint and burn model, like if your token is a LayerZero OFT, for example, it is connected to the LayerZero DVNs, and now this DVN, which is usually the servers, right, LayerZero, some other validators, you can configure that, but these servers, they manage the token supply across chain, and they treat it as like a single sort of book, a single balance sheet across multiple chains, multiple accounts, and they just make sure that there's an invariant, which means like, okay, if the user wants to go from chain A to chain B, we reduce chain A by X and we increase chain B by X, right? Very simple, super capital efficient, like, because it's just accounting, no actual money is being moved around. There's just an accounting update, right? But of course, the crazy part is like, wait, now all of these tokens are suddenly not secured by any of the blockchains they're on anymore. They are literally secured by these servers off chain, right? So this seems to be, is this cryptocurrency still, or what is this, right? Like, so blockchains are certainly being used, but it's not the same as a token that is whose supply is completely managed by a blockchain like Ethereum, and where the trustless technology is used, right? Like cryptographic technology is used sort of to move that token around. Yeah.
Can I just say, because I've worked with LayerZero, their trust assumptions at various times, but I do want to say that I think that this asset issuance does make sense for dollar-backed stablecoins. Like, you're already trusting Tether to have dollars in a bank account. So trusting Tether to say this many tokens exist on this chain and that many tokens exist on that chain makes total sense, right? I've no issue with that at all. I kind of think that maybe the surface area for something going wrong is a little bit bigger, but fundamentally, I don't think you've like fundamentally twisted the trust assumptions around that much. You have trust in Tether. Well, and I guess you can go a little bit deeper here. Circle did this themselves by building their own mint and burn bridge via CCTP. And so they're running the whole thing and they're basically putting their name behind it. Tether, I think, was actually kind of like, they're kind of smart here in sort of outsourcing this to a parallel asset, USDT Zero, that then uses LayerZero. And again, I think that that's reasonable and kind of makes sense. What Across does is just a different business. Like, we're just not in the asset issuance. We're in the fast finality. And then, Luz, I wanted to go back to something you said earlier. It's like, okay, so you go to a lot of these mint and burn assets, and you can move big size between blockchains. You can't move it instantly because these servers, like in your example you just described, these servers really don't want to get reorged. Like, if you have $1 million deposit of an OFT on chain A, you really, really, really don't want a reorg that deletes that $1 million deposit before you mint the asset on the destination chain. And so there is, they are fairly conservative in their finality assumptions for good reason, which means they take a little bit of time. But these work beautifully. If you're comfortable with the trust assumptions, they work beautifully with an intent-based bridging architecture where, like, we do this already with CCTP, and there's no reason, like, hint, hint, why we can't do this with XERC20s and NTTs and warp assets and OFTs. There's no reason why we can't do that. To like use something like USDC, we can do the intent-based super fast fill and then use the mint and burn bridge to have the solvers rebalance their inventory. Works great.
Interesting. Okay, so I have a bit of a mental reframing for myself now. I sort of knew this already about Across, but as you said, you're selling speed, right? And I think initially when you started out, and today still, like the it's like a massive gap, because like you were selling speed for a lot of assets that were only on a canonical bridge that would take 7 days, right? But as this gap is closing in, and even with Circle CCTP, the gap is 14 minutes because their attestation servers are slow and takes 14 minutes because their servers do RPCs and blockchain monitoring. They don't do risk management, right? So they are literally sticking to what the blockchain dictates. And it sounds like Across is always there for this last mile of speed. Is that like the right way to say it? So even like if everything comes down, like you are happy to have these mint and burn tokens as rebalance mechanisms for your solvers. They can use that. They now have way more capital efficiency if they can use, if they make markets for LayerZero OFTs and they can move them around via LayerZero mint and burn. That's great for them for capital efficiency. But where Across will always come in is this sort of last mile of speed, shaving off minutes, seconds, maybe even milliseconds at some point. Are you thinking like HFT stuff, or like what's the idea here?
Go as fast as you can possibly go. But yeah, no, I think that is the model. It's like, you can think of it as like credit card. Like, credit card network's supposed to be instant. And the cost of operating that credit card network, the cost of like doing the fronting, the user, the merchant money or whatever, the cost goes down and down the quicker you do the back end like payments and settlement. And so it's like, okay, I can offer instant payments. If it takes me a week or if it takes me a month to settle stuff, my cost is relatively high to offer instant payments. But if it takes me an hour to settle stuff, my cost can be that much cheaper to offer instant payments. And so that's the way I look at it. Like, any of these mint and burn bridges, really, it's just like another rebalancing option for our solvers. It's a rebalancing option with additional trust assumptions, but those trust assumptions are on the users taking those. That's not our decision. That's up to the asset issuer, right? And so philosophically, I prefer, for my own personal reasons, I do prefer a world where we just rely on Ethereum trust assumptions. Like, I like that personally, but I don't blame the market at all. for choosing whatever trust assumptions they want to choose. I don't blame them in the slightest. And Across works in either use case. It lets us offer speed for cheaper.
Cool, nice. That was a nice nice to pin that down. Actually, I definitely, I sort of knew this, but now I definitely know how to think about Across in this world where, you know, we have these mint and burn assets proliferating and where times are coming down. Actually, on that topic, I did see a tweet recently from Circle that they will have a new fast mode on CCTP. I didn't dig into it. Like, are they actually like absorbing some risk, like, or are they actually like introducing their own market making operation now?
Yep.
In search of revenue to justify their IPO, or what's happening here?
I don't know how much revenue they're gonna make off of it, but CCTP v2 does have a fast mode where Circle will take on some degree of finality risk themselves and offer you an attestation faster than finality for a fee. And I'm not actually particularly familiar on the fees right now, but and we're very friendly with them. This is all like very comfortable, but they're not going particularly fast, and they weren't pricing this particularly cheap last I kind of like talked to them. But yeah, it's like similar concept. They're like, hey, we can take on some finality risk, which means we're taking on some balance sheet risk, and go a bit faster. I still like, and like this is why we're very compatible with this too. My whole vision around Across is creating a competitive market. So we really do have solvers competing in a market setting to price that finality risk, if you will. And I like this a lot better than, you know, somebody at Circle headquarters price it, like figuring out what the price of the finality risk should be. It's way cooler when you just have market forces doing it in real time. And so, you know, my whole push the whole time has been, how do we take Across and make it maximize competitive forces within our system to basically drive the best execution we can for users.
Nice. And even there again, so if CCTP has now their own proprietary system to reduce their latency from 40 minutes to 5 minutes, or I don't know what it is, Across is still there for that last mile, and Across now can use an even faster rebalancing system. And when I say Across, I should really always think across solvers, across marketplace participants, right? The solvers, the supply side of the market, they can now make a choice. Hey, am I gonna use the slow mechanism to rebalance here with CCTP and not pay the fee, or is faster rebalancing more important for me? And Across is like, you know, at least on the margins, like unless we reach, I don't know, like probably seconds or something, then Across is still gonna be there to shave off whatever latency is not acceptable to users, right? And yeah, like how do you think of the, like, first of all, the asset profile? I remember like a year ago or more than a year ago, we were launching a shit ton of chains, some random chains as well with random tokens on there. And I was talking to you and I was like, hey, like, you know, I was figuring out like with you, like, is Across the right solution for cross-chain transfers for any token? And it seems like no, right? Like it seems like Across really is focused more on higher value, higher volume, higher market cap financial tokens, ergo big cap and stable coins. Probably now and the good thing is now there's a renaissance, like, or a Cambrian explosion coming of like securitized whatever private credit fund token, whatever it is, like a lot of real world assets and so on, right? Like Klarna, Burrito tokens, and yeah. So are you really going a bit more for the sort of convergence of DeFi, TradFi token markets, fintech style, or do you think Across shaving off seconds or something also has a place for, like, you know, esoteric gaming tokens and so on?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so honest answer is don't totally know. If you just like look at the data today and where the volume is, or and let's actually be more specific. Like, where are most transactions? So there's very much a power law distribution in like the size of transactions. So there's like a handful of huge, you know, $10 million transactions that add up to a lot of volume. but the median transaction between L2s or between chains right now is it's closer to $50. It's quite small, which surprises me, and I actually think is super cool. It means we really do have consumer use case here. So when you look at all these transactions, like what are people mostly doing? They're mostly moving the major assets between the biggest chains. That's like the vast majority of transactions. And so we're really dumbly, really stupidly, we want to service that really well. We want to service, like, out of the transactions that are getting sent, our goal is to service as many of those as we can, as well as we can, which basically means doing 2-second bridging on sub $10,000 transactions in ETH and USDC and USDT between the major chains. As we can do more and more, we want to expand that to keep going. So serve more assets on longer tail chains. That's it. That's just growing our market share.
I get it now. Like how I would frame it, Across is definitely like focused on the fat tail, not the long tail. And once the fat tail is saturated, you expand from there for further revenue growth, right? Sort of, because like the way I think about it, like with Across, it's a very application specific thing, right? It focuses on bridging existing assets and not on creating laying new routes for like any asset in a permissionless way, which is more like the Hyperlane type of thing, right? So Across, I think, really, like, you want to create markets, right? And the market makers, the solvers in your market, they need to be profitable, right? Otherwise it doesn't make sense. So like everything in the design, the question is, can we turn a profit here, right? So and often when we talk to projects that are launching chains, that's not the question for the transfer. The question is just like, how can I move my token from here to there? It's like no one is trying to make a profit in that, right? Like they're just maybe trying to pay as little as possible for that to work. So I think I think I have a bit of a mental unlock here where it's like, so sometimes if it's just about having, like, you have some use case and you literally just ask about the plumbing of how can I move an ERC-20 between two chains, but you don't, then there's tech for that, like Hyperlane and so on, right? But what Across is focused on is not just having tech, but like rather having markets, right? I think that's the difference in approaching this.
I think that's right. And it's also not just about like saturating the fat head of the distribution. It's also like, when does the technology allow us to service the long tail better too? And like, again, when we were talking a year ago about servicing like a bunch of Gelato chains, like I really want to service them. That's something that, like, people are excited to use your tech. Of course you want to like service them. But what are the constraints? What's the maintenance? What's the headache? All that kind of stuff too. And again, that stuff is going down. Like that's where all of the interop techniques that are getting invented help us service more chains with more scalability and like easier. And so, I said differently, like I think it's hard for Across to expand to chains with 7-day bridges that have no other rebalancing options. Like they don't have centralized exchange connections, or they don't have CCTP or something like that too. But arbitrum and fast withdrawals make it easier to support some of these chains. So for listeners, it's like a pretty cool way that Arbitrum allows like 20-minute to 1-hour withdrawals on their chain. And like ZK rollups, or like OP succinct, or the RISC-0 version. If we take any of the Optimism stack chains that adopt ZK and have a 1-hour bridge, great. Scrolls 1-hour bridge, great. ZK Syncs 1-hour bridge, great. This stuff all makes it way more tractable.
Yes, the way I would tie that into what I said before about Across sort of being market creation, market driven, is but with this new technology coming to market, the opposing market forces, the barriers to entry are coming down. Ergo, it's easier to create new markets because the market needs less sophistication, less capital, You know, and yeah, so it's going to be a very exciting year, 2025. I'm always, given that we, you know, like we had some experience with ZK in production, I'm always a bit hesitant to immediately jump on the roller coaster, because, you know, ZK marketing is arguably like one of the biggest teaser marketings in the space. It's always around the corner, you know. But I really I want it to be right, and if it's not gonna happen this year, I'm sure it'll be the next. But yeah, that's gonna change everything.
Yeah, and I should say to you too, like you are much more in the weeds, like running these ZK rollups to understand how real the tech is or not. The kind of in the laboratory, the times and proving times are getting really, really, really good. And that doesn't reflect production. I recognize that. But we've still got the laboratory proving times to a place that is super exciting and something that we should be stoked about.
Yeah, and I think I mean, real-time proving is really interesting, and why Justin Drake also loves it is because of based rollups and sort of composability, which, you know, like it's a whole other thing. Versus across, you guys are already happy if we have 30-minute proving, right? Like you said, that improve, like from one day to the next, your life is like 168 times easier, right? So yeah, cool. So that was great. Definitely updated my model on across, how I think about this expansion. Yeah, what about you know, how, like, let's talk a bit more generally where the space is moving. What do you think about, like, you know, chain expansions? You know, like obviously Q1 slowed down a little bit. We definitely saw last RAS chains launching, but then again, you had some major announcements. So where do you see this space moving? What are you excited about? What sort of assets are you excited about? You know, where do you see this in like 5 years? Yeah, and you know, who's going to be using across? Who's going to be using across in 5 years? And what will the volumes look like on a daily basis?
Okay, well, there's a whole bunch more there too, but again, like, to me, it's pretty simple to make the claim that if we have a bunch of blockchains in the future, and we have a bunch of normal users, there's going to be a lot of small value transactions, a lot of small value transactions moving between these chains that need to be filled quickly. And these things are complementary. It's like, if the experience of using different blockchains takes 30 seconds, we won't have billions of people using them. It's not a reasonable thing in our society to think that users are going to sit around and wait 30 seconds for a transaction to confirm. No one has that type of attention span. We literally need 2-second transactions to onboard the next billion users between all these blockchains. And so I look at Across as just serving that need. Like, intent-based bridging is going to let users do actions between blockchains, make it feel like one unified network. And that's going to have a lot of transactions flowing through it in the years to come. Yeah, and it's almost interesting to think about, like, how could that not be true? I think the only argument you have how that's not true is you have single slot finality and fast block times, and you're kind of doing everything atomically between blockchains, and I just don't think that's realistic, or really makes sense for a whole bunch of reasons. So that's my bullish Across take. I think intent-based bridging in a multi-chain world is just it's going to be huge. But I'm really curious your thoughts on what the chains look like. To me, I do think one of Ethereum's underlooked strong suits is that if you're any sort of corporate or big entity, and you want to have a blockchain or do a Web3 thing, having your own blockchain is pretty powerful. I feel like a lot of people in the boardroom would be like, yeah, that sounds cool. We get to control the money. It lives in our thing. And particularly in financial services, if you think about any of the big banks, big banks, their whole internal model is like wallet share. Like what percentage of our customers' money lives at our bank, and they want to keep increasing the percentage of money that lives at that bank. And I kind of feel like that naturally extends if they're going to go into Web3, like you have your own chain and you're fighting to have as much of your customers' wallets live on your chain. And so my mind is like, from a financial service perspective, you're going to have every financial service provider have a blockchain, and they're competing for assets, for user assets to live on that chain. I think that's kind of interesting. I don't know how quickly it happens though.
Yeah, no, I like everything is in crypto is a bit cyclical, and it's very easy to be a bit too zoomed in and then, make the wrong conclusions.
Yeah.
For example, it is true that probably a majority of the chains, or like a big chunk of the chains that we saw launching in the last 1.5 years, a lot of them didn't have a great use case for a chain yet. A lot of them were, basically just picking a stack based on where they can get the biggest grant from OP or Arbitrum or whatever it is, right?
Yep.
Or they were just trying to launch a token and have a narrative because having a chain was at some point seen as sort of cool to launch a token with. But then, you have Kraken, one of the biggest crypto exchanges, launching their rollup on Gelato, rollup as a service. And you have Ethereum and Securitize announcing a chain, right? A rollup. And Coinbase has one, right? And Binance has their own chain. And so yeah, the second order effects of this will just be, the cat is out of the bag. Like, you can't stop this, I think. And even though cyclically speaking, due to the bear market, there was like a little bit of a slowdown now, it's just going to pick up, and it's going to be 10x from where it was last time. So, like I already see like us having more rollup as a service customers that we can barely deal with probably at the end of this year or beginning of next year, because there's going to be a massive influx, I think, of all type of projects launching their chains, but especially institutions. It's completely like the way I think about this is just essentially, like we basically just created new web standards here. Like the Web 2 or web was basically all about HTTP, HTML, and URLs, right? And now this new web is going to be about EVM as maybe a sort of parallel to HTML. EVM bytecode, and you will have URLs, which is like going to be data availability, like where's this data on, like Ethereum or Celestia, and then you have the transfer protocols in between, like where you also like that you as an application actually use as well, like the cross-chain transfer protocols, whether that is canonical bridges like with ZK proofs or like you said, LayerZero or whatever it is. So I think that's just a new stack. And it's like a lot of the space was always only thinking about Ethereum L2s and always thinking, oh, does it have all the green slices and this and that? But you shouldn't be so homogenous. Like in the web today, anybody can start up a project on AWS, right? And you're not immediately like the certified like SOC 2 compliant whatever thing that you have to be if you want to deal with the big merchants and connect to them or be onboarded to Stripe, right? Like, no, there's a progression here. So I think everybody that is building in crypto at some point should have their roll up and start with it and so on. Sure, you can also start on a shared chain, especially if an application tapping into other applications on there. But yeah, no, you can't stop this. This is just the new protocols for the web, and these protocols specialize in transferring, like in tokenization and transferring tokens around stuff, right? And yeah, the net result will be bringing costs down in the industry, settlement costs, transfer costs, and then hyper financialization, as we've seen with Pump Fun, right? Hyper financialization of memes and so on, completely new things. Bringing like Apollo and so on, what they're talking about, like bringing private credit on chain so that you have leverage looping, which is super hard apparently in the TradFi world, leverage looping into funds and so on, right? So yeah, it's gonna be insane. Yeah, I hope you're not sidelined. I definitely got it liquidated on my ETH longs a lot last year, so I feel a bit sidelined. I need to buy more, but yeah, that's bullish outlook. And Across is gonna be massive in there, because if you're shaving off those seconds everywhere, and And I could totally see like like all trading coming on chain, Hyperliquid and whatnot, and all of these firms are being different venues, and for this they need like they probably need capital to move around very quickly. So yeah, bullish essentially. That's my take.
Yeah, it's like I really. Some people find this like lame or not dreamy, but traditional financial rails suck. They're really inefficient and backwards. Crypto at its heart is building better financial rails. We hope we build a bunch of other interesting stuff on top of that, but it really is better financial rails. And there's nothing wrong with leaning into that. So we're building better financial rails, and these rails consist of blockchains. There's going to be a bunch of them, and we got to connect them really cheaply and quickly. So that's what Across does.
Nice. I did forget to we can finish off this episode with some more tech because I forgot to ask you about it. So just very quickly, what's your take on Superchain and this intent system? I think that you're collaborating on with Unichain and so on. And what's your sort of take there? And then last but not least, Across Prime. I saw this white paper that you guys have. What's that? And then we can finish the episode with that.
Yeah, so we co-authored a standard for cross-chain intents called ERC-7683. You guys can go to ERC-7683.org to read about it. We co-authored this with Uniswap, basically to define a common standard for how an intent can be expressed. This has been pretty broadly adopted, like to our surprise. It's been quite successful. The Ethereum Foundation is supporting this in a broader effort called the Open Intents Framework that we're also pushing. And so everybody loves intents as a fast way to get connect these blockchains using this open standard. And Superchain, so again, going back to there's all of these interop technologies that are getting invented. Superchain is the one that's designed to send messages and assets between OP Superchain chains. And there's many ways where this fits really nicely with intents and with our standard too. Like the Superchain messaging standard actually requires users like two actions. It's like send on origin chain and then execute on destination chain. And it actually means you can use a solver in an intent to package that up into one user action. So there's all sorts of like interesting and cool stuff that we can do here too, where these interrupt technologies just help basically across solvers rebalance quicker, makes across cheaper. So yeah, okay, there's that. Across Prime, and again, we have like too much content to get through. Across Prime is a white paper that I put out with Dan Robinson from Paradigm maybe 2 weeks ago now. And it specifies sort of an evolution in intent-based bridging designs where we move from this escrowed model where user funds are escrowed on the origin chain to a bonded model where user funds actually get sent directly to a solver, but that solver has a bond that ensures fair exchange, ensures that solver won't run away with the money. And yeah, we could go deep on this. It's pretty fun. I did a Twitter space with Dan that you can find on my Twitter and listen to. But the TLDR, what's really going on here is in the escrow design, there is a capital cost for the intent system because the solver is fronting money and then they got to wait to get paid back. In this Across Prime kind of bonded design, we massively reduce that capital cost because funds get sent directly to the solver so they can like use them immediately. And so that's really the TLDR of this is like we can make intents substantially cheaper and more scalable by sending user funds directly to the solver while keeping the overall system kind of safe.
Nice. So you need the sort of super chain, how you see it, it's just gonna make rebalances easier again, right? And then just quickly for the intent standard, is the idea that more and more aggregators and applications and so on like follow the standard so that essentially like solvers on Across get more access to more flow? That's the idea, right? Instead of like Across being a siloed intent system and then there being another siloed intent system, the idea is to build bridges to between these intense protocols, so that there's like a unified sort of intent pool, and then whoever's the best market maker and can fill at the best rate gets the flow.
Yep, that's basically it. It's like I mean, it's in some ways it's a risky business decision for us because we kind of built this solver network, and we are almost standardizing it around this standard. The thought process here is it's good for our solver network because they get more order flow. Thought process is like, yeah, good for Across because we have more solvers supporting this standard, which means we have more solver capacity, support more chains, do more things. But that's it. It's like, let's define a common order standard for this intent, this cross-chain intent, kind of like a transaction type, so that we can have more and more people build on and adopt this way of doing these like fast transfers between chains.
Yeah, it's like a sort of network, liquidity network. Grow it, and then that will also help each constituent of the network get more flow and run a business. Okay, makes sense. And then for the Across Prime, again, we're talking essentially about market making and capital efficiency. There's a huge inefficiency right now because Across, I mean, there's a huge gas efficiency because Across, like I remember you 2 years ago when gas was expensive, you guys were all about like Across is the most gas efficient model. And you want a lot of flow, I think, with this because of the optimistic way, like because of the optimistic design, you never have to send cross-chain messages around unless there's a dispute, right? Versus like Stargate, for example, with every Stargate transfer, you also have a corresponding LayerZero cross-chain message, so more gas. But the problem with the optimistic model is that there is a challenge window where the solvers have to escrow the capital, and that's not great for the solver because they cannot use that locked capital to fill more trades in that time, right? So you're trying to essentially remove that or bring that down. Is the idea to have a bit of like almost like a fractional system where like the bond can, like the solver bond can be technically be less than everything that they have in transit right now, or
so
like under collateralized, or
it's not under collateralized. There's a bit of a trick that I think is kind of cool. And like honestly, the white paper, the idea is pretty simple, and the white paper is meant to be a pretty clear articulation of like a relatively simple idea. But the idea here is put some of the responsibility of making sure the solver is correctly capitalized on the user themselves. And the kind of thought process here is like, say I'm a user trying to send you money as the solver. And I can see that you've said like people have sent you, let's say they've sent you $10,000, and I can see where that was supposed to go. And I can see that you have filled 9,500 of that so far, and you have like $500 in flight, let's say. So I can observe that if you have a bond of $500 plus, like, which is what's in flight plus whatever I'm going to send you, there's like a safety mechanism. I know you are correctly capitalized to cover what I'm about to send you plus what's in flight, and so I'm safe to send you my transaction directly because you have enough of a bond behind it. And so the paper describes this mechanism of how we make it really simple and really easy for the user to observe how much is in flight, how much assets are in flight for that solver, and make it really easy for them to make sure that before they send money directly to the solver, there's enough bonding to keep that solver honest. Does that kind of make sense at a high level?
yeah, so I mean the bond is still locked capital, right? So is the idea to essentially outsource this capital requirement, like locking management, to the solvers themselves instead of having like a central planning system, so that the solvers can say, look, on average, I'm going to expect this much flow over the next 10 minutes, so I'm going to roughly lock just as much capital as I need in this time. Is that the idea? And
kind of, there's actually like a really cool optimization here too. So again, like let's say you're the solver and you lock up $10,000 as a bond. what's kind of cool is like you can work through the math and be like, well, that means that between this route, between A and B, and again, the paper does a lot of optimizations on this, you could do $10,000 of flow like every couple blocks if you trust the finality, the finalizations of the destination chain. And so you can do like a crazy amount of volume capped by the fact that you can't execute a transaction bigger than $10,000. That would be the trade-off here. However, we talked about in the paper, if I wanted to send you $50,000, I can actually do this. There's this intermediate turnstile contract. We call it a turnstile contract that everything's routed through. I could actually do something where I send you the $50,000. I'm using 10,000 of your bond, but the other 40,000, instead of it going directly to you, actually tops up your bond. So it gets locked into a bond, which makes it now look more like the escrow model, the way Across currently works. So there's this kind of cool optimization that you can kind of use this bonded model that's highly efficient if the transactions are smaller than the bond size. But if the transaction is going to be bigger than the bond size, it basically reverts back into what Across looks like today. So it's a pretty fun design. I honestly think it's pretty clever, the optimizations in here. And so we put it forward as like a research idea, just a clean way of getting way more capital efficient in Across too. Just letting us get more intense to more places and do it for lower costs.
Cool, nice. Do you think that there is at some point, like right now, everybody in the system is treated the same? It's all collateralized, right? And it's like a sort of, like not over collateralized, but like sort of one-to-one. Do you envision like some special actors in the system at some point, like known entities to be able to operate, and like with credits?
Maybe. There's like one of the things that I think is worth people in the space just knowing about is there's money transmitter laws. These are like weird American laws around, and they serve a real purpose. They're like, if you're trusting an intermediary with your money, the U.S. states want to make sure that they're not going to steal your money. And so once you start introducing custodial and centralization risks, there are some concerns there from a regulatory perspective. So I do prefer trying to figure out, and this has always been our bias, like, let's just try a little bit harder to build the decentralized system that like doesn't have too much of a trusted actor. But at the same time, trying to be like practical here too, do what the market demands.
Yeah. Cool, gotcha. Thanks a lot for that. I think we can end it here. We definitely dove quite deep. It was great having you on, Hart. Always love talking to you and super excited about what's to come. I mean, maybe you can leave us with essentially saying what we should be looking forward to this year. If you can share a little bit. I know you mentioned there's going to be some interesting announcements soon. But yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think things to get excited about. Deleting 7-day bridges. I really hope that 7-day bridges like just get deleted by the end of the year, and that's going to help. I think that's just going to help Ethereum have better trust assumptions as it scales into the rollup centric roadmap. I think it's one thing. I think all of the 7702 smart account stuff is going to allow for very seamless like cross-chain transactions using intents, where you can like sign a message that lets you execute a user op on a remote chain that's paid for by a home chain. I think that's going to be super cool. We've built a demo of this that I think is sick. And now that Pectra has shipped, it's going to be usable soon as more chains adopt this. Yeah. And I think between those two things, we're on a path to kind of unify Ethereum, make it feel like one chain again. So that's what I'm excited about. And then, yeah, like in terms of how many chains are going to launch this year, you're much better equipped than I am to kind of predict that. I don't know if it might slow down for a bit. I'm not opposed to that if we slow down for a bit before we speed back up again. I'm not bothered by that. But I do think there's going to be a lot of chains and they're going to be seamlessly connected. So I'm stoked about that. And yeah, thank you for having me on the pod. It's been really fun. I enjoy this.
Thank you. Bye-bye.